Welcome, everyone. My name is Matthew Bach. I'm the director of the endurance business at UCAN. And with me today is an esteemed panel. We have three amazing guests here today. First is Andrew Dole. He is a registered dietitian, sports dietitian. He works with a lot of endurance athletes, and his company's name is Body Fuels. And we have Ryan Hall with us, who many of you may recognize as one of America's greatest distance runners, and who suffered from some issues that we're going to hear quite a bit about in today's talk, with the issues that we're talking about today with testosterone and hormone imbalance. And also with us today is Dr. David Hooper of Jacksonville University. Welcome, everybody. Hello.
Hey, a pleasure to be here.
So David actually studies specifically in this space. His area of expertise is in exercise-induced low testosterone. So David, I'm going to start with you. What is testosterone? Let's just go right to the very high level stuff. What's the very basics here? What is testosterone, and what role does it play for men?
Okay, so broadly speaking, testosterone has two kind of key roles. One would be androgenism, and what that means is it's masculinizing. It's literally what makes a man a man. Okay, so it has an androgenic effect. The other role is the anabolic effect, which is probably what athletes are more interested in learning about. So it is a potent anabolic. It helps put building blocks together. The building blocks that athletes are usually concerned about putting together are protein and the process we call protein synthesis. We really like that because that means that we're building up muscle, for example, or in the case of endurance athletes, enzymes are proteins, and you guys really want to have high concentrations of enzymes that are involved in carbohydrate or fat metabolism. So you really want protein synthesis. So that's why testosterone becomes this key element in endurance performance.
Thank you. And I'm going to take a quick step back here and sort of outline some of the expectations. You just gave an explanation of what testosterone is, kind of laying these out for us. And as men, I mean, we all just, for some of the reasons that you just described, want to have strong hormone levels and strong testosterone levels. So the goal of this chat here today is to describe what testosterone is, how exercise and nutrition and genetics can impact testosterone, what can happen if you get it wrong, and tips on how to maintain healthy testosterone levels and healthy hormone levels. So on to the next question here. So you mentioned, you describe what testosterone is, the role that it plays in men. We want to have these healthy levels. How does exercise play a role in having healthy testosterone levels?
So it seems that, let's say you were an obese person. It's very common for, there's a strong correlation between obesity and hypogonadism and low testosterone concentrations. So first of all, if you were obese and you were hypogonadal, there's a good chance, although not a guarantee, there's a good chance that if you went from obese to not obese, that your testosterone concentrations would increase and you would be less hypogonadal. On the other end of that spectrum is, I think, what you guys want to talk about more, which is endurance athletes. It almost sounds paradoxical, but lots and lots of endurance exercise has been demonstrated to reduce testosterone concentrations, and it's been demonstrated a lot by people long before I started studying it, like Dr. Hackney at UNC Chapel Hill. It's been shown over and over and over. Endurance athletes have reduced testosterone concentrations, but let me just quickly put that into context. The reductions in the early studies in this area were shown to be statistically significant, but not hugely substantial. Okay, so you're going from a normal testosterone concentration to a slightly lower testosterone concentration, but not clinical. More recent studies started to get their hands on really, really good endurance athletes. For example, we had data from the Kona Ironman World Championship. So now we're talking about really, really fit men. Those testosterone concentrations seem to be even lower than the previous studies had shown. So it seems that higher level athletes, probably because they're training even more, they start to really get low testosterone concentrations. And now you start to see more often testosterone concentrations that are actually clinical numbers. So there are three different units that are used in this research, so it gets confusing. But the international unit is nanomoles per liter. The cutoff set by the Endocrine Society for low testosterone is approximately 10.4 nanomoles per liter. Now it starts to see, when you look at these really high-end endurance athletes, you start to see more and more commonly endurance athletes being under that clinical number.
Yeah, it's very common. I've experienced issues myself. Actually, back in 2015, I had personal experience with being an Ironman athlete, training quite a bit, competed in Kona that year in 2015, and had personal issues with low testosterone and some of the symptoms that come along with that. And I know that many of the people that I trained with at that level also had issues. So that's really, really interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, surprisingly common. So from our Kona data, we were able to look at 22 different athletes at Kona, and more than half of them were at or below that clinical number. But now here's where it starts to get really interesting. Okay, just because the testosterone concentration is low, and even if it is under that number of 10.4, you are not considered hypogonadal until you start to show symptoms of hypogonadism. So you could have a 10 or a 9 nanomoles per liter, but if you don't have any symptoms of hypogonadism, then it's a phantom condition. There's no reason to treat that. But if the testosterone is low and it is associated with symptoms of hypogonadism, like generically speaking, fatigue, or like sexual dysfunction, or probably more severely and more interestingly for endurance athletes, low bone density, that's when you have to start paying attention to it.
Now, we spoke about the exercise component and the overtraining component, which people should just be aware that if you train too much, people talk about overtraining, but they talk about it in kind of almost an ephemeral sense, like this vague, overtraining and how it can affect performance, but it could also affect health in a much deeper way. Now, what about eating and nutrition? How does undereating can that contribute to this issue as well?
So this is where it starts to get interesting and a little dicey. So I would imagine that people are at least somewhat aware of the female athlete triad, which is where if women undereat, their sex hormone concentrations drop and they ultimately lose their menstrual cycle. So the most obvious analogy to make when you start to look at this research is you start to think, well, it's kind of a male version of the female athlete triad. But from a research perspective, we're not there yet. So women have been studied in this area way more than men. And it's fair enough. It's one of the few areas of science that women actually get studied more than men. So absolutely fair enough. And the research is far ahead of men. There have been brilliant studies by Dr. Ann Lounce, where she clearly showed when you eat less, when women have a low energy availability, their luteinizing hormone is reduced, and that ultimately leads to low estrogen and menstrual dysfunction. That has not been done in men. Those brilliant studies have not been done in men. So we don't know that there is a direct cause between not eating enough and low testosterone. Now, there absolutely could be cases where that is the case, but we can't say definitively that all cases of low testosterone are because of undereating. You have to stop short of that. We don't know that for sure.
And what you're kind of mentioning here about this idea of trying to combine the issues between the female athlete triad and that does exist in men in some form. They seem to be similar. They're not identical, but they seem to try to put coin a term to that, which is red S.
Right.
And so describe how that came about and maybe some of the differences there, why that might be a little bit dangerous.
So there was a push from a panel that was put together by the International Olympic Committee to come up with this, who proposed this new term, red S, relative energy deficiency in sport. And they wanted to expand upon the female athlete triad. The three corners of the triad, if you like, are energy availability, functional hypothalamic amenorrhea, which just means, very fancy term, loss of the menstrual cycle, and osteoporosis or low bone mineral density. When people started suggesting this new term REDS, they were trying to expand upon it and say it's bigger than just that. It's bigger than just those three things. First of all, way more things can be affected by undereating than just menstrual cycle and bone density. There can be immunological issues, there can be performance issues, there can be low glycogen, for example, all of these effects of undereating that will affect health and performance. So they wanted to expand it. The other thing they wanted to expand it to was men, and say that this stuff does exist in men. And there's no question, it absolutely exists in men, these low sex hormone concentrations and this undereating. but we don't have the direct cause and effect relationship that has been demonstrated in women. So the female athlete triad group really didn't like that term and actually published a paper immediately after refuting the idea of REDS. That they really disliked it. And they had very good arguments against it. So unfortunately now there's kind of a debate in the literature where which term should we use? Should we use RED? Should we use female athlete triad? What should we use for men? And people are to some extent squabbling over the terms, which is a shame because it's distracting from the science, and the science is awesome. All three areas, everybody's trying to study the same thing, which is undereating, athletic performance, low bone density, and kind of squabbling over definitions when we should be talking about science.
Now, you know, you're talking a lot about some of the things that can happen when it goes wrong, because that's your area of expertise, like kind of diving into that overtraining, the undereating, how that impacts hormones and how that impacts health in men specifically. And we have all this big body of research on the female athlete triad too. Now, that's talking about kind of the downside, right? If you do things wrong. Now, most people in the world, most men in the world are not doing it wrong necessarily. They don't experience some of these symptoms that you're describing, like the low libido and the chronic fatigue and the bone density issues that these athletes are experiencing. So I want to hop over to you, Andrew, and talk about some of the things that you do as a nutritionist, as a dietitian, the things that you do with your athletes to make sure that they aren't falling down that pitfall, or, you know, diving into that.
Yeah. So I actually did a great lit review on David's work. I pulled up a bunch of him and Dr. Hackney's work together to see where the body of stuff was. And as an evidence-based practitioner, you were really looking at some evidence. And one of the things he points out specifically is the hypogonadism or low testosterone can happen whether you have low energy intake at all. And so what that really means is that diet and nutrition plays a role, but once you've gotten to that point, I think diet and nutrition is really limited. And so we have to look at how do we prevent, what's the prevention, what's the mitigation component. My practice coming from clinical dietetics in the hospital is really based on collaborative interdisciplinary teams where we're looking at every specialist who can be in the game and have a word to say something, which harkens back to what you said earlier. And even Ryan's like, I didn't know about this. Yeah, because we weren't testing for it, because dietitians weren't in Division I sports, because coaches weren't knowledgeable about certain aspects of overtraining, overreaching, and the nutritional aspect. So as a sports dietitian, one of the things we're looking at predominantly is to not even get there. You know, I don't want to pass through RED-S into low testosterone, because as David mentions, you know, RED-S has a whole pantheon of things. We're talking irritability, decreased concentration. So that's decreased cognitive load, depression, which then there's a cascade, decreased muscle strength, low hormones. And once this cascade starts, the whole body begins physiologically to break down when these high level athletes are burning it from both ends. So baseline tests. One of the things I have asked for in my notes, even to talk now, is talk to your practitioners, work with your coaches and your dietitian. If you don't have one, find one, and get baselines done with your primary care. Understand where your blood is, your red blood cells, your hemoglobin, anemia, iron. What does your blood serums look like? What does your testosterone look like? Have you had a DEXA done? Do we know what your bone mass density is, so that we can go and test whether it's 6 months to 18 months from now and say, oh, wait a minute, we've had a deleterious or a negative impact from this training. Something needs to change long before we get to these bad components.
Mm-hmm. Now I want to jump over to Ryan here. So Ryan, I mean, very much in the spotlight of American running, American distance running. We've run under an hour for a half marathon, absolutely crushing it in so many ways all throughout high school. I looked up to you. I graduated 3 years behind you as an amazing American distance runner in the scene, along with Dathan Ritzenhein and Alan Webb, breaking all sorts of records. Then in 2016, you retired from the sport. And so tell me more about what you felt and what you felt while you were having these issues with low testosterone, and what kind of drove you to make that decision to retire at that point.
Yeah. So, I mean, there was, like most decisions, and the body's such a complex thing, right? So there's all these different things going on. So, you know, I couldn't necessarily pinpoint like low testosterone is the reason why I had to retire, but I certainly, had all the symptoms of it and was even testing clinically low. So to answer your question, what it felt like when I was running is I'd go out for like 30-minute easy jogs. And this is during the last about year before I retired. And, 30-minute easy jog should just be super easy for a professional marathon runner. And I just felt like I was melting into the ground. Just felt super tired. I couldn't even finish those runs. So I'd like jog out 15 minutes and I'd walk back. My motivation level was super low. My body weight got really, really low. So I'm 5'10". I typically raced my best at 137 pounds, and I got all the way down to 127 pounds, and I was not racing well at all. I describe it as, even when I was running well, I would be so tired throughout much of my day. I describe being a professional marathon runner as like I walk around like a zombie, like most of the day, just super, super tired, taking 2-hour afternoon naps. And, I was doing all the lifestyle stuff right. Like I was eating right. I was getting a ton of sleep. Exercising obviously is part of my job. Also doing weights in the weight room, doing core and leg weights and stuff like that. But what was interesting with the testosterone is I never even had it checked until I started having problems in 2010. So, all through my high school days, collegiate days at Stanford, my first couple of years running professionally, never even checked my testosterone. So I really wish, like Andrew was saying, I had some baseline data of, like, ideally when I was a kid before I started running, because we all know that like doing endurance sports tends to drive your testosterone down, or at least it can. And so I wish I would have known what my testosterone was when I was, 13 years old and just getting into the sport of running. I imagine it would have been much higher. And so, yeah, I never even got it tested until I started having problems. And then every single time I had it tested, starting in 2010, I was still running well. I ran 204 in 2011, and I know I had clinically low testosterone. I believe my free testosterone was usually in the like 100 to 300 range, depending on, and I know it varies a lot like throughout the day. And so I'd always try and test it in the morning when it tends to be its highest. And I'd test it the same time every day, same kind of protocol after an easy run, or not, it'd be before I'd run. So anyways, I was trying to like really get a handle on my testosterone, and was playing around with all, looking on the internet for all the ways to raise your testosterone naturally, from, eating a high fat diet, reducing the amount of endurance running I was doing. So I went to like running only once a day, hoping that would kind of help. And ultimately I could never get it back into the normal until I'd retired from professional running, and I got into weightlifting, and really limited my running to almost zero. It's hardly running at all. And even then it took, I don't know how long it took to get back into the normal, but it took a good while. It wasn't like overnight, all of a sudden I'm back into normal. But now, I'm walking around with the testosterone level. I think last time I had it tested, it was somewhere around 700, which I'm 37. So it's back into like a good range. But I've run twice this year in 2020. So I'm really, not doing too much endurance activity, doing weights every single day. Put on a bunch of weight. I'm walking around at like 170 pounds now compared to, 127 pounds. And man, I can tell you, my energy feels so much better for life in the weight room. I feel more like a man in all of that, all of the ways that you want to feel like a man. And my quality of life has just gone through the roof. So I kind of look back at my professional running career, and I'm like, kind of, like I said, I ran 204 with clinically low testosterone. So I know you can still like run really well, but it's just kind of a shame that you have to walk around like a zombie when you're training that hard in order to run 204 and have low testosterone. So it's a really, tricky issue for professional runners that, cannot take anything that's, on that ban list with USADA.
Knowing all that you know now, is there anything that you would have done differently back in, let's say, 2010 or before that, to try to prevent this from happening? Do you think there was anything you could have done, or do you think it was just a fact of the situation?
Really, honestly, like I said, I was running really well with low testosterone. And the only thing I can think of, like if you were to ask me, like, so I coach now, like if I was to coach an athlete who wanted to keep their testosterone optimal for them and still like run well, I would have them only run 3 days a week and just do high quality workouts and just take out all the easy running. Or, you know, if they want to do some easy stuff, have them on a spin bike so they don't have the pounding on their legs. But with that said, like, you're not going to run 204 off that. Like, there's no way around it. Like, you gotta have the volume behind you if you're going to try and run 204. So, you know, for a world-class distance runner, it's kind of sad, but I don't think there's a whole lot you can do besides try and manage it. You know, eat really well, sleep well. Don't get too lean, too light. Don't buy into the lie that I bought into that, you know, you just get a couple pounds lighter, you're going to run faster. That's only true to a certain extent, you know? So, but yeah, I don't know. There's not, for a world-class marathoner, there's not a lot of good options out there, I don't think, or at least not that I'm aware of.
Now, I want to hop over to David real quick, because David, in some of our conversations, you mentioned that that there's a genetic component there and that some people are kind of just bulletproof. Can you elaborate maybe a bit on that?
Yeah, so if you look at our, when we were lucky enough to get blood from the Kona Ironman World Championship competitors, you can see that just somehow some people are just fine. Now you can look at their testosterone numbers and maybe you could get a little bit skeptical and you could say, well, maybe they're getting some help, but it's unlikely that their testosterone would be perfectly normal if they were taking the drugs that they weren't supposed to be taking. Normally, if you start taking drugs, those numbers shoot up. So to have these normal testosterone concentrations while competing in the Kona Ironman World Championships, it just suggests that some people, in certain regards, are just bulletproof. Other studies that we've looked at, often these men have low bone density, but sometimes there are men that have well above average bone density doing all this running. So some people are just lucky and others are kind of unlucky, and that for whatever reason they are predisposed to these issues. And yeah, it's just that it's a little bit of a cop out when we just sort of say genetics, because we're just sort of saying we don't know. But some people are predisposed to it and some people are not.
Yeah, I have some friends who trained just like I was, and yet they somehow didn't have low testosterone and hormone issues, any health issues, any symptoms, nothing. So I was almost kind of just floored by that. Like, oh, they're one of those lucky ones.
Yeah, some people are just lucky. You look at, say, the NFL, for example, you look at Peyton Manning and Brett Favre. They just kept going. They just never got hurt. And then other guys come in the NFL and get hurt every week. And just some people are just lucky.
Now, Ryan, did you experience bone density issues too?
Not till later in my career. So I was never hurt until 2016 when I dropped out of the London Olympics. And then after that, I just had like a string of injuries, one after the other. And I did have a sacral stress fracture during that time, but that was the only one that I have. And I was getting DEXA scans, and I don't remember exactly, but there was never like a red flag with my bone density. So no, not particularly.
And I want to jump over to you, Andrew, because as you're working with your athletes, I know you have certain views on the proper way to lean out and to be that lean athlete that you need to be competitive without hurting your health. So can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so I'm going to jump right over what Ryan said. I am a firm believer, and there is no such thing as a race weight. I think you need to train and eat for performance to what gets you the numbers where you need to be. At somewhere, it's going to balance out that you are at the weight you need to be to hit the numbers. Slowly, individualized, and don't believe that you need to be eating or training for a specific weight to be better. That's not the case. The energy deficit, the amount of calories or the types of foods and just the sheer volume of food that an athlete needs, when you start to decrease those to lose weight, you're decreasing all of the things that help you go faster. And if in your training you have breakthrough workouts or targets you need to hit and you're unable to do them for the sake of making a certain poundage, you're not really getting any bigger, faster, stronger, and going longer. You're really just losing weight and wasting time training. You know, Ryan said it, you can have some really highly effective workouts. But even in an elite situation, if you're not training each one of those workouts being the best that they can be because you're trying to lose weight, you might as well not be doing them. You're just digging yourself a big hole.
Ryan, you mentioned having not tested until 2010. When you started testing, how frequently did you test while you were having problems? And then on the way back on the recovery, how frequently were you testing then?
I'm trying to remember how often I was testing. I want to say like every 3 months. or so. So not like, you know, every month. I'd say, you know, now I test probably like twice a year, you know, and like I said, I try and do it in such a way where I'm getting like, it's really easy with testosterone to like get very varied, you know, readings. And so trying to do it in a really meticulous way to where I'm not having a lot of other variables that are coming into play. But, you know, like with my athletes, I think it's just something that you should find a baseline for, and you should be testing at least like twice a year. And also like when you get into really heavy training to kind of see what's going on is kind of what I recommend my athletes now.
Andrew, you mentioned before a bunch of different things that you could do and that you try to help prevent athletes from even getting down into that area. So as endurance athletes, or let's just say fitness enthusiasts, or really just the general population, Andrew, what kinds of things could people do? So very actionable items for the people listening who haven't experienced these issues that I've experienced, that Ryan's experienced in pretty detrimental fashion. Some of the more normal population, right? What are the things that they could do to prevent and help maintain healthy testosterone levels and health?
Well, I'm going to address that with eating adequate amount of calories that's designed for them. Every athlete is very different and things need to be individualized. And it's kind of like that cop out of, well, it's genetic. Well, it's specifically for you, but it is. There's not a one size fits all. And when we take stuff that happens at the very high levels of the elites and the pros and trickle that down to the age group athletes, I think we get a real loss of nutrients, of calories, of energy. They're just not doing things that were meant for them, logistically speaking. When you look at someone like Ryan, who in the past could do something so much faster than an age grouper, the nutrition is different. When you look at the sport you're in with Ironman, the difference between an 8, 9, 10-hour Ironman and a 17-hour Ironman, logistically, not even the same. So to answer your question, some of the things that we can really pay attention to is consult with a sports dietitian. Like, go find one to help you figure out what protein, first of all, how much protein should you be having? As we look at age group athletes getting into their 35s, 40s, 50s, our protein needs change drastically. The RDA and the DRIs are not set up for an athlete's needs. But then again, we don't need to have excess protein because it knocks out and displaces the fuels we need, like the carbohydrates and the fats. Don't be afraid of fats. Fats are the precursors to hormone production. Testosterone, with very low fat and very low body fat seeking, is actually not good for maintaining that hormone balance in the body. So eating appropriately. I want to say this because I think when we're looking at age group athletes or the average everyday person, it's interesting that they need to understand the middle. You can't out-train a terrible diet, but on the other side of that, you can't out-eat a terrible training plan. You got to meet somewhere in the middle, and they both have to be balanced. Baselines with your doctors for sure to have your blood work done. Don't rely on supplements to fill the gaps. I think I'll end that question with, oh, well, what if I need zinc or vitamin C or vitamin D or vitamin E, a highly antioxidant? Well, the problem with relying on supplements is if there's not a deficiency in place, it's really not going to help. And if we take a supplement, we're only taking one very small piece of that component, because when we eat whole food, we're getting phytonutrients, which is that fighting back against the reactive oxygen species, the whole cytokine and inflammation component of a highly trained athlete. So we need all of these fruits and vegetables. That's like eating the rainbow. And I say not Skittles, but eat as many colorful foods as you possibly can to get every different type of phytochemical available to help push back. So if we're training and we're starting to go this way and tipping over to like really highly oxidized and inflammatory state, which you get in highly trained athletes, a plant-based diet, I really believe, can start to push that back. I don't think we can out-eat it, but I think we can balance it by eating, hashtag have a plant, eat lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of varying colors, and get your vitamins and minerals from that perspective. Because an athlete needs so many more calories, we can get those additional vitamins and minerals if we eat nutrient-dense foods like fruits and vegetables, instead of highly processed protein bars or energy bars that are just plain calories. And that's one of those situations for everyone that a calorie is not a calorie. There are better calories in that sense. So eat lots of fruits and vegetables. Find someone to help you understand what your energy needs are. Definitely get your macros straight, protein, carbohydrates. Don't be afraid of fats. And again, eat as many colors as you can to help that body inflammation and just to help you be a better athlete.
That's great. And I want to touch on strength training, because strength training, well, let's hear it from you, David. What does it say in the literature about strength training? Do we have any conclusive evidence? Do we have evidence in any way to support that strength training can be beneficial or harmful to testosterone levels?
So acutely, you have a really big change in hormone concentrations depending on the type of workout. So if you do very high volume, very short rest, bodybuilding type of workout, you'll get a big jolt in certainly in testosterone as well as some other hormones too. But I think your question rightfully should be more chronic. So what happens chronically? And it doesn't seem strength training alone doesn't seem to massively increase testosterone over time. Some studies show that it has a little bit of an increase in testosterone. Some studies show that it doesn't. I think it's important to remember here that you don't want to just obsess over this testosterone number. If the testosterone number is low and you have symptoms of hypogonadism, then it's going to have to be treated. But I don't think that you should, for example, be shooting for a specific testosterone number, just trying to increase it if you suffer from the symptoms of hypogonadism. I know I got a little bit off topic there, but just generally speaking, chronically, strength training doesn't have a massive effect on basal testosterone concentrations either way.
It seems to be a component of some of the recovery programs and some of what people do to try to prevent low testosterone levels. I know in Ryan, so you've done a lot of strength training, and would you say, at least, do you think that that's had an impact on your testosterone levels over time?
Yeah, I mean, something certainly has changed, right? So like I went from having testosterone, like I said, like as low as 100 now up into like the 700 range. What is it, like not doing any endurance activity, or is it the weight training, or is it putting on the weight? I think it's probably all of those things, all I know is like, it just feels so much better, man, having a testosterone. And I know like I agree, like we shouldn't like pinpoint a number and be like, my testosterone should be this. But I can just speak to the fact of like how it feels to have low testosterone versus how it feels to have normal testosterone. And it's like night and day different for sure. Like I feel almost like a different person. So, the effects of it are huge. But, I definitely notice, whether or not, the weightlifting like has raised my testosterone or not. I noticed this. I noticed when I walk out of the gym after a hard, heavy lifting session, I feel energized. I feel pumped up. I feel like excited. I feel talkative. So actually, quick little side story. When I ran 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents, that was, man, when was that? A couple years back. So I did that, and after every marathon, my dessert to myself was I got to go into the gym and do upper body weights, right? And so I would go into the gym and I'd be like hobbling, just like a mess. And I didn't feel like going into the gym. Like I wasn't like all excited to be in the gym after running a marathon. But the interesting thing is I felt good coming out of the gym, and I was just doing upper body stuff. I don't know if it was the blood flow or if it's the like neurological aspect of being in the gym, but I felt like a new man coming out of the gym every single time. And that's kind of how I feel now, like I feel amazing coming out of the gym. So I always tell people, like, if you want to feel really tired for the whole day, like go for a long run, and then you're going to feel tired all day long. Whereas like if I go lift super hard, super heavy, I'm going to be feeling good. I'm going to be feeling energized the whole rest of the day. So there's definitely, at least from my experience, like a very different response that my body has to weightlifting compared to endurance activity.
I'd just like to touch on it a little bit. I just think that the testosterone bounced back because, like you said, you stopped running. I think the running was a big reason why the testosterone was dropping, but that's just my suggestion. But also, far more importantly, I want to say I am extremely pro strength training. I came from very much a strength training background, and I urge all endurance athletes to take up strength training. One of the main reasons being because that seems to be the best way from an exercise perspective to increase the bone density, which is probably the biggest concern in this whole area, is bone density dropping and a predisposition to stress fractures. So I just want to make it very well known. I am very pro strength training. Just want to make that clear.
For my own personal experience, I have low bone density, and it's difficult to recover from that. And I experienced my first stress reaction, which is a precursor to a stress fracture, when I was in 2016. And so before that, I really was not injury prone, especially with stress fractures. I'd never had issues with that, but it takes many years for it to decline. And I found that in 2016, I had a stress reaction in my femoral neck. So in my thigh, essentially, or right around my hip area. So it was pretty eye-opening to me, noticing that all of a sudden I noticed that my bone density is low, which I didn't know was even possible because of hormone imbalance and overtraining and all these things that we've been talking about. What about supplements? So we're talking about natural supplements here, because as we know, and we've mentioned it a couple of times in this discussion, that if you take testosterone itself and you use a cream or whatever it is, a shot, exogenous testosterone that is illegal or banned is a performance-enhancing drug. It can also have some side effects long-term as well that we won't get into necessarily now. But so the natural supplements. So are there supplements out there that that can help possibly? I'll kick it over to you, David. Andrew touched on it shortly before, but I'll kick it over to you.
So there are quite a few supplements that are said to be testosterone boosting, and some of them really truly do work. Some have been shown to statistically significantly increase testosterone. But here's the thing, this is where you probably shouldn't get too excited about it, because it's not like juicing. If you juice, even at clinical doses, if you take exogenous testosterone, you're talking about quadrupling your testosterone concentration. Okay, and that's at a clinical dose, not even a crazy dose. When you start talking about these testosterone boosting supplements, like for example, fenugreek, they have been shown in some studies to raise testosterone, but the amount that they raise them is nowhere near those numbers that have also been associated with, massive strength gains, massive muscle mass gains. So it may increase them a little bit, but it's not an enormous amount. Fenugreek is one. There are hundreds. I assume you guys have seen the TV commercials, Nugenics, Ageless Male, all of these. They often have kind of a cocktail, lots of different ingredients in them. Fenugreek is one of the few that's been shown to increase it. I'd ask you too, Andrew, are you familiar with any others that have been shown to increase testosterone?
No, you said it. The ones that do it don't do it clinically significantly, right? Statistically, they can show a change, but does it matter? And the answer is no. And David, actually, I'm going to toss this back to you, because zinc is one of these things that you see on all the sites. Take zinc, testosterone. The thing with zinc is that if you have a deficiency, yes, we'll see an improvement. But if a deficiency doesn't exist, the zinc's not going to magically make you, He-Man for any reason. So I think with the supplement use, it's yes, if there's a deficiency, we use it to replete, to bring the levels back up and then maintain. But it's not something that's going to catapult your testosterone into massive performance. I really don't believe there's anything out there to do that. Otherwise, everybody would be on it.
Oh, absolutely. And then it would be banned, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I was found to be somewhat deficient in zinc, so I was taking some zinc. My vitamin D levels were low. Vitamin D is considered a hormone. I think that might have something to do with the chain that could help with testosterone. Is that true?
Yeah, well, vitamin D, a hormone precursor, vitamin D is linked to lots of things. 10 years ago, everybody was on it over the age of 35 for cardiovascular health. And now that transition has sort of changed into immune health, mood, mental health, GI, gut health. Vitamin D is one of these linchpins. And it's right up there with vitamin D should be tested in all athletes all the time, especially at altitude. It needs to be done. It's part of everything. Whether you should be taking it just because, the answer is no. I firmly believe if you don't have a deficiency, there's no reason to take it. A lot of things, however, with nutrition and diet, and we'll stay on the skim of those, is like people are changing the foods that they eat. Milk consumption, for example. When you start to reduce things that had previously been high in a certain, what are you going to replace that with? So where's your vitamin D coming from? We don't see a lot of people eating whole fish anymore and all the bones. So where's the vitamin D coming from? So I think you're correct. Vitamin D is definitely a component for all athletes that should be tested. Whether it specifically will help with testosterone, no, I don't believe so. But again, like Ryan said, we have this physiological being that's all these things tied together. And once something starts to break, there's going to be a compensation mechanism and something else is going to break and take over. So vitamin D for sure. Zinc, if you've got a deficiency, yes. Otherwise, no.
Yeah, there is a magic supplement that will raise your testosterone, and it's testosterone.
Or youth?
It's perfectly legal from a law perspective, and a medical doctor will give it to you if you're hypogonadal, but WADA doesn't like it.
You know, Dave, that's interesting. Ryan mentioned that he wished he would have had his testosterone tested when he was younger. Now, that's problematic, isn't it? So, I mean, when we look at young athletes, they're on free steroids. Like, their testosterone levels are through the roof at a very, very young age. So at what age do you think we could start to see low testosterone actually? Yeah, where would the age cut off? Because we can't do it under 24 or 18. Tell me about that. Well, what's your view?
You can't do what? Take exogenous testosterone?
No, I think you can take the test, but because a young athlete or a young male is going to have such elevated testosterone production, wouldn't it be difficult to really diagnose a low testosterone in a young athlete, let's say late teens to early 20s?
I think it would be rare in that circumstance, but it's perfectly possible. So surprisingly, although we know that as you get older, testosterone concentrations reduce, surprisingly, from a clinical perspective, there are no age-specific testosterone concentrations. There's just one number. There's not a different number for a different age. The number that the Endocrine Society recommends is 10.4 nanomoles per liter. But again, they don't focus on just the number. If you're below that number, you also have to have a presence of symptomology before they're going to give you anything to treat it. You know, it's not if you don't have symptoms, it's just a number. So there aren't specific age cutoffs for testosterone.
Now, there's some really cool questionnaires. Is it ADAM is what it's called?
That's one of them. Another one is the AMS, the Aging Male Symptoms Questionnaire. There's a few of those.
That's right. And so when an individual male, I think this is important because it's just like with Red S and parents and their female athletes, like no one's having the conversation. I think men aren't having the conversation with anyone. Like, most of my clientele, I would say 80% are female. They're great. Men don't really want to have these conversations, these habitual type things. So the questionnaires, they can go do them on their own and really have a self-assessment to say, maybe I should talk to someone about this, right?
Yes, although most medical doctors don't love these questionnaires. The one that I'm more familiar with, because we've used it in our research, is the Aging Male Symptoms Questionnaire, and it's 17 questions. You scale from 1 to 5. Some of the questions are super general though. So for example, references to fatigue. I mean, everybody suffers from fatigue, right? That doesn't mean everybody is hypogonadal. And then they save the very personal questions for the end. And the last 3 questions off the top of my head for the Aging Male Symptoms Questionnaire are to do with erections and to do with sexual dysfunction. And like you say, most men do not want to talk about that. It's considerably easier for a woman to go to a doctor and say, I don't have a menstrual cycle and I'm not pregnant. What's the problem? It is very difficult, especially for a young man, to go to their doctor and say, I'm having erectile dysfunction. And forget, I mean, a young college athlete, is anyone ever going to admit that? I mean, it's tough.
And where do you find those ambiguous questions in the beginning? Not to say that the questionnaire is bad. I actually did one, reading through some of your work and some of Hackney's work to see what it was all about. But some of those early questions, you can, as a age group athlete, you can just be getting tired.
Absolutely. They're so non-specific.
Right, with work and kids and everything else.
And that's why the medical doctors often don't like it.
But it's a good start.
Definitely.
That's a great point you bring up, David, about those questions where a lot of men just don't want to talk about those types of things. They're not willing to be open and transparent like Ryan has been. And that's part of the problem, is that a lot of people don't know this can happen. A lot of men don't know that they can suffer from these issues if they're overtraining or undereating or doing any of these things wrong. So it's been, I think, one of the barriers as to why it hasn't really become something that is well known. And, I fell victim to it without even knowing that it could happen to me. It was a couple of years at least before I really realized what was going on with me and was able to correct course.
Yes, I think there are several reasons why the women's literature is so far ahead of the men's in this area. But I think the one most significant one is how conspicuous it is to lose your menstrual cycle. If you're a woman, difficult for me to say as a non-woman, but I ask women this all the time. If you lose your menstrual cycle, I assume your first thought is, oh no, I'm pregnant, right? And then if you can rule out that you're pregnant, you're perfectly happy to go to the doctor and say, what's going on? Now, unfortunately, in the women's world, some doctors think that it's a perfectly normal thing to happen and just accept it and say that this is a part of being a female athlete, which is not true, is dangerous, and that should not be the case. But for the man, there's no menstrual cycle that's missing. The only thing that they may pick up on is a sexual dysfunction, and they're not going to talk about it.
No, but after taking that quiz and having this conversation now, as I sit here as a practitioner, there's no reason why, like with my female athletes, do you have a menstrual cycle as irregular? With my male athletes, how are morning erections? How's sexual libido? Like, it should be a question that's on my radar that should be asked.
Yeah, I recently asked our IRB, our Institutional Review Board, when we get ethical approval to run a study, and I sent that questionnaire into my IRB, and it immediately bounced back to me like, why are you asking these questions? So it was a huge, right away. Even then, before I've even asked the subject that question, I've got people saying, should you really be asking these people these questions? It's just so taboo.
Ryan, was there a period of time where you were really uncomfortable about talking about these things, or were you always so transparent?
No, I mean, I always was open just about talking about, my experiences and things I was struggling with. And just, I know like there's a lot of other pro and endurance athletes who are struggling with the same thing, So, if I can help someone out by talking about it, like I'm going to talk about it. Obviously there's stuff that comes with it that's not fun to deal with, and that I guess you could be like ashamed about, but I mean, I don't see, like, I didn't do anything wrong, right? I was just training hard, and like this kind of came with the territory. And so, you just kind of own it and try and help other people by being open and talking about it.
Well, thank you for that. And we're really happy to see that you've recovered so well. And now, I mean, you're ripped. You no longer look like a runner. You look like a strength trainer. So what are you gonna become a fitness professional? What's next?
No, I just wanted to experience the other end, Like, I was a tiny little runner for a long time, and I remember just being around big, strong people and just wondering, like, what does that feel like? Like, I have no idea, So it's been fun to kind of like walk towards that way. I'm still not, a 300-pound bodybuilder, super strong, world's strongest man, but it's nice to be able to pick up 400 pounds off the ground when before I can only pick up like 100 pounds. So it's just a welcome change. And I could just tell, like, with how things ended for me, like, it's what my body was craving. Like, endurance sports are great, and if you do it in a healthy way, I think it can be a really healthy lifestyle. But I think you got to be really conscious that, like, you're doing it in a healthy way and you're not overdoing it. You're really taking care of your body. You're sleeping well, you're eating well. Because if you're not, like, running is designed to like strip your body of everything it doesn't need to run. And I can attest to the fact that, like, that's not a great way to walk around life. Like, you don't feel great walking around like that. Like, walking around a little stick at 127 pounds is not a good quality of life. So, now I think with my athletes, just trying to find like a healthier balance than I had, and like I said, I think you can run really fast, like, I think I could coach someone to run a 2:20 marathon on 3 days a week of really high quality running and have them like run really well. And that's like a good marathon, right? It's not gonna get you on the Olympic team. It's not gonna get you even to the Olympic trials, but you can run a really good marathon off that. But if your goal is to be a world class, like, you have to be over the line of like what's going to feel good and what's going to be super healthy. There's kind of no way around it. So, it's not great news for professional runners in my mind, but also too, it's just like learning that that's okay for a season, like I went through a season of 20 years where it was all about seeing how fast I could run. And I had to accept the good with the bad. Like, it was really fun to run 2:04. It was really fun to run 59 minutes. But that means, like, you got to walk around with low testosterone and be tired and training super hard and be unbalanced. Like, that's part of the cost. So I think just as long as you like realize that as a pro athlete, being like, this is going to be a season where I'm going to see how good at this thing I can get, but it's not going to last forever. I'm not intending to live my entire life like this. And eventually I'm going to come out the other side like I did and start giving back to my body and doing some healthy things that gets me back into a more balanced state.
Matt, do you mind if I ask Ryan a quick question?
Yeah, go for it.
Ryan, so as you were saying, like you feel so much better when you're strength training now. Do you think you could have done more strength training back then when you were running without it interfering with your running?
Yeah, that's a great question. A good point. No, not really.
It's a shame.
You know, I was doing leg weights twice a week, and we were doing heavy stuff. You know, like when we're talking about bone density, we are doing like rack walkouts. You know, you just put a whole bunch of weight on the bar and just walk back and forth with it, try and drive that bone density up. And we're doing some like fairly heavy squatting and things like that. Now I have my athletes doing a lot of hex bar deadlift where they're moving a lot of weight. Like that's my big thing with weight training is how I do it slightly different is I would do partial range of motion and a lot heavier weight. I think that's good for bone density and also for strength adaptations. And most runners, endurance athletes shy away from that kind of lifting because it's kind of scary to them. But if you have a strength coach that's watching you move and you're not going in those full range of motions where you can get in trouble, I think it can be a healthy way to kind of drive up that bone density and testosterone and strength gain all at the same time.
I think that sounds awesome. And you don't think that would interfere too much with their running?
So you're going to have to periodize it, right? Like,
Okay.
so say like now with coronavirus or when there's no races, like lift super heavy, callus your legs to it, go like really, really intense. And then you got to taper it off, like especially once you're getting into competition season. So you got to pull it out, a month before your biggest competition. But really like the goal is to like callus your legs to it because it's gonna flatten your legs for sure. Like your workout quality is gonna suffer whether you're running or biking or swimming. Like now, like I can only lift, if I lift legs, I have to give 3 easy days before I lift legs again, So if you're trying to do that with running, like it has to be done. Like you have to go do your hard run and then lift on the same day, like an afternoon. And then you got to give yourself 2 or 3 days before you do that again. But it's going to flatten your legs in a way that like you've never experienced if you're not doing like heavy lifting before. So you really got to like periodize it and try and callus your legs to get used to it to some extent and then pull it out when you're in that kind of competition phase.
I think that's brilliant advice. Thank you so much. I'm going to be quoting you for a long time now, trying to convince more distance runners to lift heavy. I love that. That's awesome.
That's great. Well, I hope everybody learned something here. Thank you for listening in. I hope everybody kind of had some takeaways here for how to preserve natural and healthy hormone levels. And thank you very much, Ryan and David and Andrew, for joining us today for this discussion.
That was a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.